so I was the account executive over this pass punt and kick contest with Green Bay Packers, the Colts, the Bengals, and the Browns. And so it was around the Chevy Avalanche.
The Browns is a football team?
Yeah, out of Cleveland.
I didn't realize that. Hey, I got to ask you one question. What the hell happened? Was it the Oscars or the Emmys when Steve Harvey got it wrong? He announced the wrong thing. Who was responsible for counting that? Was it that PricewaterhouseCoopers?
I think that might have been Ernst & Young. No, I don't know.
Good answer. Welcome to Game of Crimes. Hola, amigos, amigas, players, playerettes, dudes, dudettes, everything in between. Welcome back. This is going to be episode 63 of the greatest show on earth. It is Game of Crimes, and I am your host, the former trooper, the former detective, everything that Murph aspires to be. I am Morgan Wright, here literally with my partner in crime.
Hey, everybody, it's Murph, and if you need your tire changed, call Morgan.
We do a damn fine job. Just don't get the uniform dirty. And by the way, we would have done this a little bit faster, but it's mealtime, and I had everything up on the screen, and my cats walked across my keyboard and deleted half the stuff I saw.
Well, see, we call it Murphy's Law, right? It's affecting you now.
I love my cats anyway, but they are like kids. After a while, you go, can I give them back just for a while? Anyway, hey, guys, welcome to Game of Crimes. As you know, just some quick housekeeping, because that's what it says on the show script here. Just head on over to Apple and Spotify. Do that 5-star review. It really helps out a lot. It helps out with getting us visibility and exposing more people to this thing we call podcasting. Head on over to our website, gameofcrimespodcast.com. Everything, our book list, actually, our merch. We've got a guest coming up here in a couple episodes that's got 2 books out, working on a 3rd one. It's going to be a fun one. We just got through recording that episode. Get on our mailing list. Also, head on over to follow us on the social media at Game of Crimes on Twitter, at Game of Crimes Podcast on Facebook and the Instagram. But Murph, where do you got to be? Where do you got to be? One more time. Where do you got to be?
You got to come on over and join us on Patreon. Give us a shot. Listen to some of the extra content that we're putting out there. And like you've heard us say before, I think we've got more content on Patreon than we do here on the regular podcast. But there's it's an opportunity for us to maybe get more into our opinions, because on the podcast, we want our guests to tell their story. Although Morgan likes to tell his story, but we kind of blend that in and it all works out. When he's looking at, I'm getting a look right now on the video from him, like, you son of a gun.
Just don't open any packages, Murph. Don't open any packages.
But come over and check us out and see what you like, what you don't like. Let us know. Weigh in. We listen to our listeners, and we ask for your input. How can we make this better? So check us out on Patreon.
And that is patreon.com/Game of Crimes. We've got some great content coming out. We've got episode 3 of the Cali Cartel just released. We've got episode 4 coming up, the Real DA Narcos, talking about the Real DA Narcos Cali edition. We've got You Can't Make This Shit Up, 911, What's Your Emergency? So we got a lot of great stuff. Just check us out, patreon.com/Game of Crimes. You can also go to paypal.com and use our email, gameofcrimespodcast@gmail.com, or paypal.me/Game of Crimes, whatever it makes it easier for you to support the show, just like a jockstrap. How can you help support us? And remember,
wow. All righty.
This is a show about crime and jockstraps. We talk about bad people doing bad things and bad people doing bad things to good people. We take the story seriously, but Murph, what do we never do?
And if you haven't figured it out, we never take ourselves serious. We're going to have some fun.
That's right. And to have fun, guess what time it is, Murph? Guess what time it is? Guess one more time. Guess what time it is?
I bet it's time for Small Town Police
Blotters. Blah, 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 blah. Here we go. Yeah. Hey, Murph.
Yes.
More stories out of Florida than I can shake a stick at, dude. You are the leaders. There's Florida Man and Florida Woman. This one comes to us from Angie Rush over on our Game of Crimes fans group. In fact, you got to go check that out. Go to Game of Crimes fans. Sandy Salvato, a favorite mafia queen, will assess your worthiness, answer a couple easy questions, and you too may be led into the inner sanctum we call the Game of Crimes fans group. And coming from her, this comes from Titusville, Florida.
Woohoo! That's not too
Steve,
far away.
I got to tell you, I've seen a lot of things, even back in my trooper days, but this one, a woman with an open bottle of Jack Daniel's whiskey in a bag was arrested for driving a golf cart. Mm-hmm. Not just on a golf cart, not just anywhere. on Florida's busiest interstate while drunk. The 58-year-old woman was on the shoulder of Interstate 95. And tell you what, had it not been for a heroic truck driver, a semi-truck driver spotted the woman driving in the golf cart in the center lane of Interstate 95 in Brevard County, which is the heart of Florida's Space Coast. The driver advised she observed her passing out while driving, so she used her truck to steer the golf cart onto the shoulder. Once on the shoulder, they grabbed the keys, they arrested her. But I got to tell you, here's what's interesting, and I had to do just a quick bit of investigation. She was charged only with basically, being drunk in public. They found an open bottle, but they did not charge her with driving under the influence. And I had to go check the Florida statutes to find out. Basically, there's a special thing about golf carts and what she was doing. I don't know why she wasn't charged with DUI, but only in Florida is a specific definition for golf cart in the Florida statutes about what you can and can't do with it. And that's why I think she avoided the DUI charge.
Well, there's so many turtles down here. We like our golf carts, we take them everywhere. Why get in a car when you can go on your golf cart? And anybody can drive drunk on a golf cart on a golf course. It takes a special person to be able to do that on Interstate 95.
And they were so descriptive, she was drinking Jack Daniel's Tennessee Fire Whiskey.
Yeehaw.
That was the instrument of choice. All right.
I thought Jack Daniels and I were friends back in my drinking days, but it always turned out he never was my friend.
All right. Well, no, wasn't George Young's friend either. That's what he said. But that wasn't the dope that killed him. It was the drinking. Ruined his liver. Yep. Hey, by the way, Steve, I don't know it's actually in Waukesha, Wisconsin, 10:24 p.m. A woman in the 1800 block of Center Road reported that her neighbor was taking pictures of her while she was in her bedroom. Mm-hmm. Now, police determined that the woman was was extremely intoxicated and said she had seen some kind of bright light coming from the neighbor's bedroom window. Officers made contact with the neighbor, who was completely blind, and said he wouldn't take pictures of her even if he wasn't blind.
Oh, boy, well, that would just kill your ego, wouldn't it?
Oh, my God.
Even a blind man doesn't want your picture of you.
It's that bad. Yes, it is that bad.
That's one of the best ones we've had so far. You're so ugly, a blind man doesn't even want to see you.
Take your picture. How ugly was she? That sounds like a Johnny Carson joke.
Yeah, it does.
Well, Steve, I got to tell you, this is the other thing, too, is sometimes it's like, do you really have to describe this? So, Bryan Middle School reported the theft of an American flag on the morning of October 1st. It was 4.5 foot by 3 foot. Mm-hmm. Steve, is any description required of the American flag?
Well, Lord, I'd hope not. I think everybody in the world knows what it looks like.
Well, not according to this one. The 4.5 by 3 foot flag was described as being red, white, and blue.
Well, you know what? That's just filler for the report. I'm going
to throw one more in, too, because right above it, and I just saw that, too, on the morning of September 27th, the Bellevue man discovered that sometime during the previous night, a person dented the driver's side door of his Honda Civic with a plastic ornamental squirrel.
Was that that's not Florida, was it?
No, that's Bellevue. I don't know where could be Washington. I don't know. There's a Bellevue up there. But anyway, thus endeth the reading for today. Kyrie Domine Dona es Requiem. So,
thank goodness, huh?
Even a blind man doesn't want to take your picture, honey.
Oh, man. That's funny.
I think the alcohol did influence some of that, though. So, speaking of influencing things, this one is going to be an interesting interview for a couple reasons. It's interesting because we're going to get into talking about stuff. We had Jeff Sandy on a while back. Jeff was a actual fully sworn IRS agent. The work that he did overseas with Tariq Aziz, tracing down Saddam Hussein's millions and billions, and some of the work he did later with Tom Kirk is good stuff. Now, but this is a local officer who, because he took accounting in college, he said he had a head for numbers. But he also played football, and this guy is a big guy, played football, but also worked for a large accounting firm before he actually got into law enforcement. I'm going, that's like Terry Tate, office linebacker. You see somebody showing up in a suit and tie, plastic pocket protector. We're here to audit you.
Yeah.
But this is one you got set up for us, Steve. So tell us about Keith.
Yeah, so we're going to bring. We got the interview here with Keith Cregan, who is a lieutenant with the Morristown, New Jersey Police Department. The way we found out about Keith was from his IRS supervisor. So Keith is a task force officer assigned to DEA and the IRS in that part of Jersey. And his IRS supervisor is a listener to Game of Crimes. And he contacted me and he said his name, and this is Carlo Nastasi. So Carlo, thank you very much. Carlo said, "Love your show. I've got everybody in the office listening to it." And one of our task force officers, started to use the acronym there, TFO, is one of the hardest working, most intelligent police officers I've ever met with. A true law enforcement professional, and he's got some great stories. You got to get him on the show.
You almost said he was a real trooper. You just almost said he was a real trooper.
No, I didn't.
Yeah, I saw the words forming.
You're hearing stuff. I would never say that. I mean, we're not talking about fixing cars or anything here. Anyway, reached out to Keith, and he is such a humble man. And you could tell, we've never met him in person, but when we record our interviews, we can see each other on video. One of these days, we might even show you guys if we get to that point. But you could tell this is a big man, but and has done some miraculous things. You're going to hear some of his stories, but just as humble as they come. And this is for Sherry Foster. You're going to love it, Sherry. His daughter, he just took his daughter to UGA. She's going to be a bulldog coming up soon. So,
Ooga.
Loving having Keith on here. It was an honor to have him on the show. And let's get on into his story here. What do you think?
Yeah, because this is really a master class. I mean, he kind of gives us a master class in one of the cases we're talking about is a money laundering case. How it comes to their attention, some of the things that they have available to them. Because, folks, it's all about the money. If you can disrupt the money, you can take the money away, then you can take the toys away. And you get the dope, but if you get the dope or some of the toys, you get some of the lower level people. You want to get the top people. You want to take out the head of the snake. Follow the money. So, Steve, if we're going to follow the money, and we're going to hear another masterclass in how the Internal Revenue Service and their task force officers track down people who are selling millions of dollars worth of coke and laundering that money. I can ask you one question. Are you ready to play the most tax-friendly, tax-compliant podcast of all, the original, unadulterated, and biggest, baddest podcast on the internet, Game of Crimes?
Absolutely. So everybody get in, sit down, shut up, and hold on. Bring on Lieutenant Keith Cregan, Morristown, New Jersey Police Department.
My friends, this is a unique experience today. We have had people jump out of airplanes. We've had money launderers. We've had, you just name it, George Young to Luis Navia to people who are dealing in the types of stuff that we're going to be talking about here today. But this is the first time we've actually had a certified police, accountant, fraud, cop, badass investigator on the show. So, hey, from Morristown, New Jersey, welcome, Lieutenant Keith Cregan.
Thank you.
Good to have you here, Keith.
I appreciate it. It's an honor to be here. I've listened to the podcast, and
we've warned you never say that. You say that now. Wait till the podcast is over. So,
but you've had a lot of great talent on, and it's an honor to be on with you guys. So thanks for inviting me.
Today will be no different because we're just doing a little work on our pre-show and got some interesting factoids we're going to cover. But hey, look, Keith, first of all, we just want everybody to know you are at the station recording this, obviously with the full approval of the chief and everybody on down. But it is an active station. So if an alarm goes off, if Keith is, has to get a Band-Aid for a paper cut because he's working in the financial crime section, if something may happen. So if you hear that, that's just nature. That's just the way it goes. But
well, you might hear a gunshot up there, and that might be New Jersey dispensing justice out there. That's what you got to do, right?
That's about in New Jersey, but
yeah, that's more like Newark. Yeah.
We got a lot of friends up that way.
Drive-bys at the police station are not a normal everyday occurrence, so let's hope that doesn't happen. But hey, look, as we do with everybody when we get started, Lieutenant Keith, hey, look, tell us, how did you get involved in this thing of ours? Because it is unique. Just reading a little bit about your bio, how did you get into law enforcement, considering is that your dad and you guys talked about becoming an accountant because that's what the FBI wanted. So how did you end up being a cop?
Well, I think from an early on part of high school, I kind of, steered towards the financial piece of it. Again, you mentioned my dad. He was an accountant, and um, when I was in high school, I had a propensity for the numbers, and I wanted to get involved in law enforcement. My ultimate goal, graduating high school and going into college, was to get into college, an accounting degree, and use that degree to get into the FBI. So that was like kind of a track that I was looking at early on. And
Did you receive counseling for that career desire?
That's
well,
right.
it ultimately never happened. So you can probably pick apart why. But I had learned that they took lawyers and accountants out of school, and you didn't have to do your 3 years of experience, within law enforcement. So it was just a track that I started. And then when I, got into accounting in college, the natural progression is to get into the big five accounting firms at the time, the public accounting firms. And right out of college, actually going into my senior year, I was offered a job to work for PricewaterhouseCoopers. So my entire senior year of college, which turned out to be my fifth year because I played football in college,
Where at?
University of Delaware.
Is that the Blue Hens?
It is the Fighting Blue Hens under legendary coach Tubby Raymond.
Now, the only
God
thing
bless
we
him.
have in common from a football standpoint is ready on the count of three. Let's say it. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Go Irish.
Go Irish.
Excuse me.
Yeah, Murph.
You gotta get that in there, right?
Go
Gotta get that in
Mountaineers.
there.
That's what we're saying. Go Mountaineers.
Go ears. Go ears.
How about them
Yeah.
ears?
Yeah. So why the University of Delaware?
Scholarship. They offered me money to play. It came down to an interesting story. It came down to Lafayette College and University of Delaware, which were both recruiting me from high school. I wasn't a big kid at the time per se, but I was getting recruited to play defensive end, and it came down to actually a coin flip. My high school baseball coach realized that I was having a difficult time deciding what school, so he pulled me out of class, brought me down to the school pool where he was a phys ed coach or phys ed teacher, and he had me pull a coin out of my pocket and flip the coin, and he saw that it landed on Lafayette, and he saw the look in my face, and he goes, "Son, you just made your decision." And that's how I ended up at Delaware. But I was getting recruited by a
Well,
coach.
why is that? What was wrong with Lafayette?
Nothing was wrong, but when I did official visit there, it was secluded. It was on a hill, and Delaware just was a bigger school and a bigger football program. And so I had to tell the football coach who recruited me, his name is Dave Cohen. He's actually now down at Wake Forest. When I had to call him and tell him, "Listen, I appreciate you recruiting me, and but I made my decision. I'm going to go to Delaware." He was disappointed, but he wished me luck. And then a few weeks later, he called me up and he says, "Hey, I just want to let you know you made a good decision, and so did I. I'm going to be your position coach at Delaware."
Oh,
So
cool.
the guy that recruited me ended up being at Delaware and was my position coach for a couple years until I switched over to the offensive line.
Nice.
But yeah, so that's how I ended up at Delaware, was a flip of a coin, I guess you could say.
Yeah,
So-
but you know what? That coach that had you do that knew what he was doing. I mean, he was
Yeah,
helping you
well,
make a decision.
he never told me that he was looking at Delaware. He was obviously recruiting me for Lafayette, and yeah, so
He
it turned
appeared
out
to be recruiting you for Lafayette. He was shaping your little mind. Hey, but
Yeah.
Yeah,
so
and your poker face gave you away when you flipped that.
yeah,
coin.
right.
how does that work? How do you become a big stud defensive then offensive lineman and take accounting at the same time? Did you not catch some shit from the other guys?
I did. But so the way it worked at Delaware is you had a winter session and a summer session where you could concentrate on one class. And so it was an abbreviated high intensity class so I took all of my hard accounting classes during those times. So I didn't have to go to 4 different classes. I could just concentrate on 4 or 5
Dang.
different classes. But yeah, I can concentrate on that one hard accounting class. So, I tried to be a good student, but it's all time management. It's, you're practicing and you're sore and you're tired and you have your friends and your roommates who are also playing football. So you're all in it together. But yeah, no. So in accounting, one class, built on the other. So you definitely had to stay, up to speed and involved and stuff. So, but accounting really didn't click for me until post PricewaterhouseCoopers. I was there auditing actuarial tables for insurance companies,
Ooh, that sounds
Damn.
exciting.
which is why I didn't stay in public accounting very long.
Well, didn't I
But
read that you were doing something for Major League Soccer?
yeah, so with PricewaterhouseCoopers, I was trying to get on the sports side of it, like the entertainment client. So they had the NFL and some other big programs, and I ultimately got onto it was Simon Schuster was one of the clients that I worked on. So I got onto the little entertainment side of it, but by that point I was so I had moved on and I got into sports marketing. Another passion of mine was sports. So I worked for a production company out of New York City, and it was like anything around sports, like travel entertainment packages for big companies. And then I did my big one was the pass putt and kick contest that we did for GMR Works, which is the advertising arm of GM, and we did that for the NFL.
I remember
so I
those
was
things. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so I was the account executive over this pass putt and kick contest with Green Bay Packers, the Colts, the Bengals, and the Browns, and so it was around
Wait a
the
minute.
Chevy Avalanche.
The Browns is a football team?
Yeah, out of
I
Cleveland.
didn't realize that. Hey, I got to ask you one question. What the hell happened? Was it the Oscars or the Emmys when Steve Harvey got it wrong? He announced the wrong thing. Who was responsible for counting that? Was it that PricewaterhouseCoopers?
I think that might have been Ernst and Young. No, I don't know.
Good answer. That's like if something goes wrong in law enforcement, we blame it on the bureau, right?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Well, it wasn't us. So from the time you got out of college and how many years are you out of college now between PwC and working for doing these things? Are you 4 years out of college now?
I graduated just to set the time down. I graduated in 1999, went working for PwC, and I ultimately got hired by Morristown in 2004. So obviously the big event that happened in that time frame was 9/11, and I was in the city for 9/11. I was working at what it was called Tuckman Sports Enterprises at the time, and we were cold calling different companies offering services, and the business just tanked because of 9/11. Nobody was traveling, everything was going on. So shortly after 9/11, I had a resume into Major League Soccer. So then I ultimately took the sports marketing and promotions, and then parlayed it back into my accounting experience with PricewaterhouseCoopers and my background, and then I was doing sports finance with Major League Soccer. So then I did that for several years. And so kind of after 9/11 was the big push, where I was at the same time interviewing for the FBI. I took the test. I got to phase 2, and they wanted to sit down with my wife at the time. Well, my current wife.
My wife at the time. Does she know that?
Well, maybe we can edit that piece. No, but so yeah, they wanted to talk to her about moving, because that was the big thing with the FBI. They were going to move you around. The office that you got recruited in wasn't going to be the office that you worked in. So I was being recruited out of Newark, and they wanted to, ask her how she felt about moving. And, I was born and raised in Morristown. I haven't, gone very far, and there was no way she was moving, too many family in the area. Mm-hmm. So at that point, when I decided the FBI was a no-go, that's when I took the civil service test and ultimately got hired by Morristown.
So let's rewind a little bit, because you've glossed over 9/11 a couple times. That was a big issue, in your area. Obviously, New York, New Jersey. You got the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey. I think lost 34 officers, 343 firefighters. That was a huge day. How much of an impact did 9/11 have on you to say, yeah, this is definitely what I want to do? I want to go into law enforcement.
So I was up on 34th and between 6th and 7th. That's where the office was, right kind of near Madison Square Garden. It was east of the Empire State Building. So when 9/11 happened, people came out of the back room, holy crap, plane just went in. And we made our way up to the roof of the building, and we were standing on the roof looking downtown and can see everything happening. And the first thing that I thought was, I looked to my left and there was the Empire State Building. I'm like, this could be the next target. I'm getting out of here.
Could you see the Twin Towers from where you were at?
Yes. Yeah, you could see everything happening. And so I actually made my way back down to my office because I was going to get ready to go. And, it just so happened my father was able to get myself on the phone, and my brother worked in the city and my sister worked in the city. So my sister worked downtown, and at the time, nobody had talked to her. So my father, helped my brother and I coordinate a spot, no cell phone service. So we ended up going and I waited on a corner for him in the city, prearranged, and then we beelined it over to the ferry terminals because the ferries was one of the only ways you could get out. And we waited in this line, and it took all day to catch a ferry out of the city. And at the same time, you're watching all of the smoke and everything. But while I was doing this whole thing, I couldn't help but want to go down. They kept saying everything was blocked, I think, south of the 14th Street or whatever. And I couldn't help but saying, I want to go down, but I also have my wife at home, and what am I going to really do down there? And it just was like this burning feeling, like I wanted to do something. And I later worked with, officers that actually packed up from Morristown and went down into the rubble and helped. But the defining moment for me was shortly after 9/11, there was a big blackout in the city. And when the blackout happened, everybody just poured out onto the streets all at once. And it was chaos because people didn't know at the time what was happening. And when we beelined it back to the ferry, instead of this long winding line waiting for the ferry, it was just chaos at the ferry. And ferries would come in and they would load with the people in the front, and then it would go to Hoboken. And then another, but by the time people moved up, there was no more people going to Hoboken. So it kind of left empty. And and I just had this desire to stand up and try and coordinate this thing. Like, everybody going to Jersey City, go to the left. Everybody go to Hoboken, go to the right. And there just wasn't happening. So when I was going through that was ultimately the decision when I said, I have to do something. And this is why I became a cop. And when looking back on it, it was that chaos of the blackout where I was like, I want to do something that I could,
But
help.
Even before you got into law enforcement, you're starting to exhibit signs of leadership. That's somebody coming into chaos and trying to make some sense out of it to get control of the situation. And even though you're unsuccessful and you have no authority to do that, it's just you took the initiative, which is, it's like I tell anybody to listen to me. You have a choice. You can be a leader or you can be a follower. Choose to be a leader, and that's exactly what you were doing there, which I think is extremely admirable.
And many of the things Murph leads on in West Virginia are not suitable for publication on this podcast.
Yeah, next time you go to West Virginia, you may not come back.
Or at least with all my teeth. All right, back to Keith.
But the process to get hired then as a cop is, you got to wait for the civil service test. You got to take the test. You got to wait for the results to come back. Then you sit on a list. So I was sitting on this civil service list for, I think it lasts for 3 years, and it was the tail end of the list.
Is that for every department? So no matter which department you want to get on, you got to take a civil service test?
Well, no. In New Jersey, you have civil service towns, which is what Morristown is, and then you have chiefs towns. So our neighboring agency is Morris Township, and they are a chiefs town. So that's all designated by, the chief doing their own, recruiting and hiring process, where we go through a list of the testing candidates and how they rank in their testing. So
your testing is only good for Morristown then?
Well, no. So your civil service is throughout the whole state, but you could designate where you want your results to go to.
Okay.
So I was kind of silly because all I wanted to do was work for Morristown. So I just designated my list to go to Morristown. But guys that came on after me were hired off of the county list. So once you exhaust the Morristown list, then it goes to the entire Morris County list. And then once you exhaust that list, it'll go to a state list. So I was towards the tail end of the Morristown list. I guess I didn't test too well at that point, but you get preference if you're a resident in town, and I was a resident. This is a
recurring thing. Why wasn't that?
We weren't going to tell anybody that. Man.
Yeah, we were going. Hey, but real quickly though, too. Tell us real quick though. set some context too about Morristown. Tell us about basically what's the population of the town, how big's your police department?
So our police department is authorized for, I want to say 62, but we've hovered in the 50s for as long as I can remember. And we go up and down depending on retirements. And, the academy, the guys that go into the academy, guys and girls that go into the academy, they are, it's 6 months in the academy and then you're probationary and then you have to, go through training and all this stuff. So to get somebody hired and onto the road is well more than a year. So we kind of fluctuate in terms of numbers, but so we're about 2.5 square miles. We have about 20,000 residents, but because it's the county center, it's got the Superior Courthouse, it's got a trauma center, it's got a train station. We do well over 100,000. During the business days here in Morristown. So we are a busy department. We are probably the busiest department in the county. And it's has everything that you can, try and that you want to get involved in policing. We have an emergency response team. We've got a traffic team. We've got, different types of specialized officers, and we have OEM, our emergency management officers. So although we're a small agency, we do have opportunities, but they're far and few between. So I think we have 5 or 6 detectives. So when I got hired, I was on the road for 3 years and then got put down in the bureau in relatively short order.
Yeah, 3 years is pretty quick. How did you make that transition so quick from the road to investigations?
It was always told to me, because I worked midnight. So they said, write a good report so the bosses will, learn about you through your police reports. And obviously being an investigator, that's obviously what everybody reads is your police reports. Yeah. So it was instilled in me early on through some of my bosses to write a good report. And then, we had a lot of turnover, at the time. So, it was just kind of a natural progression. It's a unique schedule, and some of the older officers didn't want to do it, and it just was offered to me, and obviously it was a no-brainer. So
I used to tell people when I was a detective, the pen is truly mightier than the sword. I said I sent more people to prison with a pen and an affidavit writing reports, than anything else. And that's the whole thing is, because you're really a storyteller at that point. Can you tell me a story that has a beginning, a middle, and an end? It has a good conclusion. You followed logic. It follows the steps, and not every case, no case is perfect. Every case has holes. The job of a detective is just to make the holes so small that the bad guy and girl can't get through them. And if you don't have the facts, guess what? You don't invent new facts. You go out and either find new facts or you change the theory of the case. Unless you're in New Jersey and you're dealing with Tony Soprano, right? Then it's different.
Yeah.
The admirable thing about Morgan too is both people he arrested did go to prison.
Yes. Yes, they did. And I know where Jimmy Hoffa's buried. So,
right next to Elvis.
but I really enjoyed my time on the road. This shift work is definitely brutal on the family. I had 2 little kids at the time, and working midnights, and you always felt like you had jet lag. But you really got a chance to work on a squad and the camaraderie of the squad and stuff like that. I've been, that's one of the things I miss about the road, and obviously the various calls. And when you're younger, it's obviously, young and gun, and you're ready to go on any call, any hot call that comes in. But I definitely missed that, and I didn't have it for very long. But then, after those 3 years, I was really, really interested in going into the investigative unit. And then I've kind of, from there, like I said, we're a small agency, so you work on any different types of cases that come in, whether it be, a murder case or a robbery or aggravated assaults, whatever it is, rapes, you're investigating, and if you're on call, you're catching those cases. And so you do learn at the deep end of the pool. And, I was fortunate to work with, I could say this throughout my whole career, smart people, that taught me, the right way to do things and to be thorough and complete. So yeah, it was a great experience down in the bureau. And you're talking about the pen. I did a lot of search warrant cases. I actually gravitated towards the drug cases, in our town. So, that was that was what I kind of steered towards, was, building those cases, writing affidavits, presenting the judges, and then, building cases like that. And, from there, I was, because I was, all of our cases, if they elevate in degrees of crime, they then will move up to the prosecutor's office, where you're working hand in hand with the APs and then the detectives up in the prosecutor's office.
Hey, let's stop there for a second, because that is a unique arrangement between a lot of places. A lot of places, the cops do all the investigation. There are no investigators in the DA's office, or the attorney's office. And so how does that work? How do you guys not end up having a turf fight, or, get into a turf war, between, well, this is my case, no, it's my case. So how do you guys draw the lines between, what they work on and what you work on?
I guess it's kind of a trust factor. You build relationships from case to case to case, and who some of the people you can trust. And I had an informant years ago who was very good, and he would steer me to different cases. And one of the cases he steered me to was previously investigated by our prosecutor's office, and it actually helped rekindle another relationship from a detective in the prosecutor's office, with new information that I was able to bring to him through my informant, and it just kind of morphed, and it worked. And you really have to take a step back and say, it's not about me, it's not about the case, it's about the greater case. And why we get involved in this is to take down criminals. So you do have to kind of take a step back and say, if I'm going to make this work, I need other people to help me in my cases. I need the detectives that are going to work with the prosecutor's office up, in the Morris County prosecutor's office. So I always took it a step as, like, I'm not going to create a turf war, but I'm going to, reach out for help. And that's just how I've always operated.
Now, does the DA's office there have the authority to come in and take over a case based on certain things? I mean, can they take a case away from you as a city department?
I mean, they can. They always try and work with you. I mean, I think that's the nice relationship we have in Morris County is they could have they could strong arm you, but then good luck getting the next case out of you. And I think they do recognize that. Like, if you're going to create that, this is my case and only my case, then there's going to be another case down the road, and yeah, good luck with me helping you do that case if you're going to do that to me.
Well, a lot of those investigators in the DA's office are former police officers also, aren't they?
Oh, yeah. Well, you can do your whole career in the Morris County prosecutor's office. There are retired guys that go up there as agents and kind of help, do different pieces. But, the people that I worked with, and I'm dating myself here a little bit, it was, from 2007 to when I went full time with the IRS. So it was that short, 3.5 year window that I was working, with these guys hand in hand. And now they're all elevated and they're all bosses up in the prosecutor's office now, and many of them retired. But yeah, I think we had a good working relationship. It started with, I was working with senior detectives that had good relationships with them up there, and it just worked, and it was just a natural progression. So it really was never something that, I only came across, turf wars later on in my career, where, we're kind of battling that now. But it's, it is what it is. And you'll work through it, like I said, for the greater part of the cases and to bring down the criminals. So that's at least in my experience.
So, Murph, guess who started out life as an investigator in the Bergen County District Attorney's Office?
Bergen County. I don't know.
Dominic Polifrone, one of our guests, the guy who brought down the Richard Kuklinski. He started off in the Bergen County DA's office.
They probably had to get rid of him because of all the F-bombs he drops. Man, you got to go fast if you're going to talk like that.
The other case with American Gangster, he started out in Bergen County, I think, too.
Yeah, well, between Dominic Polifrone and Tommy Cindric, these two hold the records for most F-bombs ever dropped in a single episode. I didn't realize everything could be described that way.
Keith, do you know a guy up there named John McCabe?
I know the name.
Retired DEA. I think he's in Bergen County. He might be chief of the investigators up there now. Super guy. I mean, just a hell of an investigator from Jersey. We pray for him every day, but he's got in his blood. He was born and raised there. He can't help it. You know what I'm talking about.
And that's one of the nice things about law enforcement is if you have the connections and you reach out, somebody's going to know somebody at some place. And if you have a good reputation, and like you brought up, Morgan, if you're going to strong arm people, nobody's going to want to work with you, and your reputation's going to get out there. And I was fortunate. I didn't really have that too much in my career, especially within Morris County.
Hey, so put it in context too. Tell us where your county is, where your city is in relation to the state.
So we're northern central. We're about 30 miles west of New York City, maybe a little closer. On a good day, you can get into the city within 50 minutes.
Okay.
And we have a train line that goes right from Morristown into Penn Station. Midtown.
Is that the
Manhattan.
PATH train?
No, the path is closer to like Hoboken and Jersey City. This would
Okay.
be New Jersey Transit.
Yeah, I tell you, when I've been through New York several times, and Penn, it's just trying to figure out which line you're supposed to be on. All the trains that are in there, man. I think I got lost and wandered around in there for 24 hours.
I'm not going to ever say I went west by accident.
Hey, well, so let's talk about some of the stuff. We're going to start getting into the case that we're going to talk about here in a little bit. But when did your accounting background? By the way, I want to go back to a phrase you said. You said you had a propensity for numbers. Did you ever run numbers in college? Were you doing any gambling?
No. Actually, I was. AC was close to Delaware, and at times we did trip up to AC. But going
That's
back
Atlantic
to my
City.
Yeah, Atlantic City. My father, he was straight laced by the books, and he says, "Listen, if you're going to gamble, just do it as entertainment, right? You're gonna have your $100 and just think of it as entertainment. And if you win, you win." But I never got into the running the numbers. But blackjack, and I don't count cards, but blackjack was.
Why did you feel the need to tell us that?
Because I the way you guys rib, I assumed that's where that was going.
We were not going to say anything of the sort.
But no, so that was the only thing. Just a couple trips to Atlantic
Mark,
City.
you notice he said he didn't count numbers. He never said anything about his buddies he took with him who were counting numbers.
Oh no. My buddies were smart in their own right, but they were not accounting majors. So
and
now
just
that is a backhanded compliment there. They were smart, but not that smart. Yeah.
No, well, the dumb football meathead, Lyman, always kind of stuck around with us. But no, so I didn't, in college it was, it wasn't anything like that.
Well, the reason I brought that up is I threw out Tony Soprano just kind of jokingly, but there still is a lot of organized crime in the area. We had Michael Franzese on. He was actually a Maid Capo regime, Colombo crime family. How much organized crime were you exposed to growing up in your area that you were aware of?
I was aware of some organized crime, a little further east from where Morristown is, but I was never really exposed to it. From an investigator standpoint, when I took on cases within Morristown, a lot of them it came from street information or whatever got passed down through some source or whatever. So again, most of my cases that I concentrated on were all drug investigations and not so much. I can't remember any mob stuff that came through on my end.
Yeah, did you have any mob stuff happening in the town?
In Morristown, no, but in Morris County, yes. Like
Okay.
that was something that the prosecutor's office, had different cases that did tie into that, and that was an interesting interview with him. I couldn't believe that he could keep numbers like that in his head. I have a propensity for numbers, but I can't do that.
You're running. I mean, you are bankrolling people. You're loan sharking, and he's keeping all of this stuff in his head. And I'm going.
When I was at Major League Soccer, I worked with one of the executives there was that type of person, and he would ask you questions about what game made what revenue, and he could regurgitate something that was said to him months ago. And okay, I guess that's right. I'll have to go look it up. And you go, no, that's right. I don't have that.
Sounds like my wife. She remembers shit from 10 years ago and brings it up.
But no, I'm not.
I think all wives do that.
I'm not like that. I mean more of like I could kind of see the flow of money, if that makes sense. Like when I was at PricewaterhouseCoopers, we did training in it was in Canada. It was in Mississauga. And they had all of these different examples that you were supposed to go and look at invoices, and I would pick out all of these different errors that was happening in their case examples, and they're like, yeah, that one's not in our in our notes here, so we'll add that to the notes if I saw an error or whatever. So I just was able to kind of digest things, I guess, pretty quickly in terms of reviewing documents and stuff like
Some
that.
cops are good at remembering license numbers. Guys that do wiretaps are great with telephone numbers. We're all good at remembering names, especially the criminals that you put in jail, that kind of thing.
Oh, well, then I have to drop, and he's gonna kill me. He's already said he's gonna walk through and kick my door down. But he's now a captain here, Michael Buckley, and he was my first boss in the DB, and he was instrumental in getting me to where I was at within the IRS, and I'll explain that later. But we called him Rain Man because he could remember any phone number that he needed to get to, and you would say, who's Johnny's number, and he'd regurgitate it, and then you would say it was he's definitely Rain Man in many ways, but he's
Why don't you take him to Atlantic City?
No, that would be another beast you'd have to deal with, though. We'll stay clear of that one.
So now we also have a rule. You have to define acronyms. I know what it means, Murph. You said DB a couple times. So what's DB?
Detective Bureau. Sorry. Everything's acronyms, okay. Right? Detective Bureau.
It is.
No, yeah, DB, AC.
Hey, let me straighten out one thing here, because if I don't, I'll hear from it. I looked up John McCabe. He's at Union County, which I think that abuts you guys, right? That's right next to you.
It's actually where the IRS building is, Union County. But is it Union? It doesn't butt us, but it's further east of us.
So, John, sorry I got that wrong, buddy.
Yeah.
Close enough for government work.
I'll hear from it.
Yeah, close enough for government work. Speaking of government work, let's talk about your government work, because you said your captain was instrumental getting you involved. So kind of take us through the trajectory. You're in the Detective Bureau, the DB, as we on the inside call it. But you're in the DB. And now when do you start working? When do you start getting affiliated with outside agencies like IRS or DEA or other folks? When do you start working those things? And what leads you into becoming a task force officer?
So because of the drug cases I was doing and the search warrants that were coming out of them, there was I guess he was a captain at the time, Jeff Paul, who's like a legend in Morris County in terms of all the different types of investigations. And he worked very closely with my boss, Michael Buckley, and they were able to get me into a DEA financial school that was being run in Southern Jersey. So on a whim, I'm going to this 3-day school, and it was first where I learned about this IRS task force that was being formed. And they were looking for, local cops, county cops to be part of this task force. And at the time it was called, the SAR task force. And
acronym.
So I brought it.
Time out. Acronym.
Yeah, suspicious activity reports, which is what the task force was called.
So and just as you're doing that, also add context to what SAR means, how it's used, its purpose.
So the SARs are part of the BSA filing.
BSA?
And we would
BSA
Bank
Boy
Secrecy
Scouts
Act
of America.
filings.
We're going to bust your dude.
I used to do this to all the other federal guys that always talked acronyms. It was awful, and here I am doing it. But yeah, so the Bank Secrecy Act, has various filings, and one being a suspicious activity report, and the banks are required to report on any types of activity that they deem suspicious that moves through a financial institution. So they're filing numerous reports on a daily basis, and it's law enforcement's job to go in and pick them out. And so that's where we would, that was part of the task force was, reviewing these various types of filings. So
what triggers a filing? So if you're a person coming in, because you always know with most people, it's like, hey, you come into the country, they say, hey, if you got more than $10,000, you got to declare it on your customer. It's okay. You can bring in more than 10,000. You just got to declare it. What are some of the things that trigger some of these reports?
So the CMIR is what you just spoke about, the currency monitoring. I don't even know the name of that acronym, but I know it's CMIR. So if you're going to fly into the country and you have $15,000 on you, you're supposed to declare it. And it's just a time-stamped form that goes into IRS form heaven that says you had $15,000 at any given time. So there's, within the Bank Secrecy Act, the BSA filings, there's currency transaction reports, which is very similar, but now that's movement of money through a financial institution. So if you have more than $10,000 and you're going to make a deposit, the bank fills out a form, and that form goes up in the IRS heaven. So one of the things that we were doing was looking at structuring. So structuring is taking a pot of money and breaking it down to avoid that form. So if you have, let's say, $50,000 in cash, and you say, I'm going to take $9,000 and go to this branch, deposit 9, go to another branch, deposit 9, go to another branch, deposit 9. And in the grand scheme of things, you just moved $50,000, but you just deposited it away to avoid the form, then that would be called structuring. So structuring would happen, and, we did, structuring cases. But what happens is, on the back end, if the banks sees that and it's filed, they'll do what they call a back office CTR, and it's ultimately getting filed, but it's just saying there was multiple transactions that happened on a given day that totaled $50,000.
So every suspicious activity report at some point also has won't necessarily have a currency transaction report, because it doesn't trigger the filing,
right? So
right?
A suspicious activity report might report on the $50,000 movement of money, but it might also report on, let's say, money moving to Iran, or money, whatever happens, money coming out of China, money being wired in a certain way. There's a number of things that could trigger a suspicious activity report. A teller pullback. So I bring in $15,000, and the teller tells me, you have to, if you deposit 15, their form has to be filled out. Well, you pull back, 6, and then you deposit 9, that would be a pullback. That might trigger some type of filing if it happens on so many occasions. So there's a number of things that might trigger a filing. And I can't speak to that piece of it, because I've never worked, at a bank, but, there is,
Just the simple movement of money between banks, not all of those trigger a SAR, suspicious activity report, because banks move tons of money, on a daily basis, right?
Oh, just so everybody knows, the CMIR is currency or monetary instrument report. See, we're educational,
right? So these are all.
Yeah, but you had to Google that.
I knew it at one point, but too many acronyms and too many forms. But so going back to now the training, as part of this training, you learn about these things in law enforcement, and what to look for, and all these different financial trainings. But then they also pitched this task force. IRS came in, and they said, we're looking to get a group together that has financial experience. And I brought it back to my bosses here, and at the time, Sergeant Buckley was like, this could be a home run. And you're trying to build, big financial cases, and the end result would be, forfeitures. So if you're seizing drug money off of somebody, and that drug money then goes through the process and gets forfeited, because I'm involved in that as a Morristown officer, Morristown then gets a share of that. And that goes back into police operations, and it's.
And so when you said it was a home run, what you're saying is that if you work enough cases, make enough seizures, your position actually gets paid for through the seizures.
Right. So they were actually use the seizures to replace me as an officer, that allowed me to stay, on the task force, and then, not be down an officer at Morristown. But, because our numbers move, vary year to year, the guys and girls were still pulling up the slack because I was gone. There was always kind of, more cases that people had to divvy up and stuff like that. So, again, if it wasn't for Mike Buckley, he got named by the IRS as a PPA, and I'll persistent pain in the ass, because he kept calling and saying, "Listen, Mike,
now, is that in the dictionary of acronyms? PPA?
Well, that's what they called him, so PPA. So he would call on a regular basis and say, my guy's available, and he actually convinced the IRS to create a part-time position for me. So, I worked with, as I got to and there was a little back and forth at the time within Morristown, because the other mayor was trying to do another federal program, 287G, which was trying to deputize us as immigration officers. And then when a new mayor came in, he reviewed the program. He says, okay, I approve of this. So then it took a little time to get through, but then I got onto the task force. I was a part-time officer, and I had worked with, you had brought up Steve, Union County. There was, investigators from Union County, Monmouth County, some local local departments in South Jersey, and then Hillside. So there was, 5 or 6 of us that were then doing these types of cases. And, we would do outreach programs with the banks and to show that there is a worth for them, doing these different types of filings, and that we are reviewing them and stuff like that. So, so with Michael Buckley being the PPA, then I was able to kind of get into the task force, and I was part-time for about 9 months. Another officer retired, and then they just pushed me full-time. And then that was in like 2011. And then I stayed there till about 2019 when my agency brought me back. But what was a home run for me is I left the agency as a detective, and with the civil service rules, when I was eligible to sit for the sergeant's exam, I took the exam, I came out on a list, and they promoted me into sergeant, and they kept me at the on the task force. And then several years later, I was able to sit for the lieutenant's test. I sat for it, came out, and they promoted me into lieutenant. So then I've elevated the ranks. I think by 2013 I was a lieutenant, but still doing cases on the task force.
So there are not that many lieutenants in your agency.
So you
right?
were
No, I think there's five or six of us.
So to give up a lieutenant position to go to a federal task force, that's a very high ranking position. Very unusual.
Yeah, that's a commitment that the town made, and I was fortunate, and since I've been here, I think the town's seen a little more than $2 million in forfeiture funds.
So if I was a defense attorney, I would say, Your Honor, my client is obviously innocent because the only reason this money was seized was so that Lieutenant Keith Cregan could stay on the task force and enjoy just living the good life.
Yeah,
my client did nothing wrong.
I wouldn't say it was a good life, but what the task force office, what that did was I would get calls from our guys and say, I have this type of case. Do you know anybody in this agency, or do you know anybody in that agency? And it was kind of like a good way to steer different leads or different cases or what have you. And right now we have an officer that's, working with the DEA exclusively. And so, it definitely kind of, it got us exposure to, larger agencies and more, if we have issues in town, we have those connections that we could, go to and use. So
I was just going to say, when you put people in
ahead.
jail for these different crimes, you hurt them. But when you take their stuff, like their financial assets, you can make them cry.
Well, right.
Because that's what they're in the business for.
Right. Exactly.
Hey, talk for a second about the politics, though, of asset forfeiture and divvying up stuff, because we've all had those experiences, right, where somebody comes along after you make a good seizure and they go, hey, where our guy was just a mile down the road and he was almost there, so we should get 10% of whatever comes in.
So those decisions are always outside of my control, which is great. I don't really have to deal with that. You always say that, listen, just, remember us. But again, I don't want to say that this is about the money for us, No,
it's not. But let's be honest. When you get those things and you can legitimately seize the assets of narco traffickers or of criminals and stuff, and you go to dividing them up, dividing it up is not a mathematical problem anymore. It's a political problem.
So a lot of that. So with the task force, there were certain percentages that were already worked out, and that's typically what happens if you're case specific or if you are just, part of the information. It kind of depends on how many hours you guys are you put into the case. So I've never seen any type of infighting. I'm sure people feel slighted at some points, but
I tell you what, in Atlanta, I ran the OCDF strike force, the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force strike force for the Atlanta division, and had multiple agencies in there. And the only reason the state and locals wanted to get in was to get into asset sharing. It also benefited their city or their county, whatever their jurisdiction was. So I don't want it to sound like they were just in it for the money. But some of the ugliest fights in the world were when it came to asset sharing. Well, we've had a guy in the task force. Yeah, your guy's been here. He ain't done shit, but or he has. You had to, and then you call I was an ASAC back then, assistant special agent in charge. But you call your group supervisors in and say, Guys, give me the percentage breakdown, how you want this to go. Justify it. Let's get this over with. Get off my desk.
Yeah, and that's where, the case agents at the federal, they'll fight for people that deserve it. At least is what I've seen. They'll definitely say, if he did a majority of the work or was the lead agent or the testifying agent, he obviously deserves more. And I've seen that. I've seen that piece of it. But again, it's good.
No, I was going to say, let's run that thread out a little bit, because you were at a DEA school and the IRS comes in, right? Which is a small nonprofit organization. A friend of mine used to work for the Inspector General for Treasury, TIGTA. And, but so you started getting, so you now start doing these cases. What point in your career, you said you did this from up through 2000, from just till recently, right? 2000. I was looking at my notes here. Up till what? 2019.
So
you said
I got pulled back. So after the trial that we'll talk about, I'm sure, I got pulled back, and accreditation is a big thing in law enforcement now, and so the town wanted the police department to become accredited. So, being the only boss that didn't have a workload within Morristown, they brought me back to do accreditation.
So and that's CALEA, right? The Commission for the Accreditation of Law Enforcement Agencies.
That's a more steep.
That's the national.
Ours is the New Jersey Chiefs Association. So it's 60 standards that are considered best practice within the state of New Jersey based on Attorney General guidelines and case law and stuff like that. So so we implemented all of these different standards, and then we have to prove that we're following them.
Oh my gosh! Did you
compliant?
Did you piss off the chief?
Well, let's go back to the fun part.
Again, I was the only one without a current workload, and I wasn't here to defend myself.
That's why you never want to miss a meeting.
It definitely trickled downhill, and
you got volunteered.
Yeah. Hey, listen, again, I know what I signed up for, so that's fine. You come in and you do your job, and then so I did accreditation, but at the same time I was working a case with DEA, and they wanted me to come back case specific to continue to help develop it. And so while I was doing accreditation, and with the blessing of the chief, I would go down and continue to help the DEA farm out leads, and then looking at different financial pieces, and then it morphed into, well, I need certain resources from the IRS, and the boss who brought me into the IRS, who was a special agent, Michael Montanez, he was a supervisor special agent. He was now the SAC of New Jersey. And so it was a phone call to Michael Montanez, and I said, this is where I'm at, and my agency would be happy as long as I continue to do my full workload, if I can come in and be part-time. So that's just kind of how it then morphed back full circle to now I'm both case specific at DEA and, part-time with IRS, so criminal investigation.
You got a lot of,
and then,
so I just totally jumped into the near.
Well, no, but let's start setting the context for that too, because what we're going to do is talk about a case you had between 2011 and 2014, basically about a 3.5 year period, involving a guy from Guyana. So let's start setting the context for this case. Like, what were you working on? What were you doing? And because this guy transported hundreds of kilos of coke, we're talking about millions of dollars in money laundering. But everything has to start off with a lead or a tip or an indication. So let's talk about, how did this case start for you?
Well, some information, comes across our desk in various forms, and we started looking into, financial movements, and through the grand jury subpoena process, we started looking at bank accounts, and, I can give you the one liner. It was, between April of 2011 to September of 2014, this individual had over 12,000 cash deposits totaling $7.5 million, and that is an exorbitant amount of money.
That's a clue, right? We call that a clue. Hey, but go back. You mentioned something too, and a lot of people don't really understand, I think, the power, especially at the federal level, of a grand jury. What kind of power do you have when you have a grand jury at the federal level? What kind of things can you do? What kind of information can you get?
Well, for me specifically in my role, I would, we would go through the grand jury to issue subpoenas to financial institutions, to review, bank accounts. So there was definitely, we went through the through the U.S. Attorney's Office and specific attorneys that I worked with, and based on the information we had at the time.
And just for our listeners' knowledge, so you can't just go in and throw your federal task force officer badge out there and say, "I want to see somebody's records," right?
No. It's based on specific information that comes.
Yeah. So it's not like, and I just wanted to bring that
And
out.
you have to get
it's
the
not
bank.
like you can walk in the bank and take a look at anybody's records. It has to go through the judicial system. And
No.
You got to have paper that goes with it. It has to
Right.
be officially approved, and somebody has to review
Yes.
it, right? So what was the process of getting a subpoena for you you're not a federal guy, but you've got federal authority now, but what process did you go through to get a subpoena to serve on a bank, for example?
Yeah, so I sat in the U.S. Attorney's Office. We had offices in there with the task force, and we worked with a handful of AUSAs, both in the asset money laundering division, and through the task force. And one of the AUS, and I preface this because I've worked with a lot of smart people, and one of the attorneys I worked with, Evan White's, he was instrumental in moving a lot of these different cases. And another AUSA, Marion Purcell. If I went through all of the AUSAs I worked on this case, I think I would have at least 20
wow.
different AUSAs that touch this case in various regions, whether it be in San Juan or up in New York. And in the money laundering division. So we would issue service to the banks and get records back, and that's when we start creating a financial picture. And since college, I had been dealing with Excel, and Excel is a very foreign program for a lot of law enforcement, but I've just seemed to gravitate around it, and I tell all of my cases.
Well, hell, you could do a pivot table in your sleep, right, and write a macro.
I
You're
get all the
fine.
questions here in the agency. My Excel formula is screwed up. What am I doing? And it's like a click of a button. But it's So I tell my cases through Excel, and so for this particular case and building out 1,200 cash deposits, and then following the flow of money. It's over 20 bank accounts and goes to various assets. And when you printed out my schedule, it was on legal paper. It was from the floor to the ceiling, covered a door and a half. It was yeah.
So now these cash transactions you're talking about, you said that they occurred basically like within a 3-year time period.
Yeah. So it was.
So, but what got you started on the case to begin with? I mean, because you didn't wait 3 years and then start doing this. This was over a period of 3 years, right?
Well, so my case actually initiated in 2014. So
Okay.
I started building out a picture in January of 14 that then we presented it for civil seizures. We were going civil, which means we were going after the movement of the money. And at the time, the IRS was reviewing a policy change in terms of if we were going to do civil seizures, we actually had to prove that the money came from illegal sources. So we would do civil seizures not knowing what the money was. It could be legal source versus illegal source. But IRS then had changed their policy in the late summer of 2014, where they said, okay, you just uncovered $6 million of structuring, but you have to now prove that the money is coming from an illegal source. So
how did you go about doing that then? Is that where your work then with the DEA comes in? And
it's funny because, you talked about not sharing cases and keeping, cases to yourself because you don't want them to get strong armed. I'm doing these cases out of a cubby and a computer terminal, trying to look up, cash deposit slips and trying to paint my own picture. I was trying to figure out where I was financially before I actually even stepped out and looked at it criminally. I did surveillance, and I did all of these, criminal, techniques in a criminal manner, but, looking for criminal, violations. But my main thing was telling the financial picture first, and then figuring it out. But when they told me to do legal source, I hooked up with a former IRS agent turned HSI agent who's now with the FDIC, Pete Chartier. And I picked his brain because I trusted him and I'd worked with him in the past and he had a good reputation, and we started running with it. And, that's when with HSI, most of the Homeland Security Investigations, to cover the acronym, they cover all the stuff that goes within the border. So very early on in the investigation, I could see that, this person owned, hangars in Gainesville, Florida, was from northern New Jersey, and based on public information, he's a pilot that flies to Guyana, and
Now, you got a place in Florida, you got New Jersey. Why would you want to fly to Guyana?
He's originally from Guyana, so he was.
Yeah, I get that, but still, that's you got to have how many stops did you guys? Obviously, you're tracking him at some point because you said you were using surveillance, doing some other stuff. So, are you tracking his plane as well too while it's in? Watching him go from Florida to New Jersey or whatever to Guyana.
So it's interesting. All of my different cases that I've worked over the years, I've learned something new, and this one is now learning about the airplane industry and who to contact to get on a regional airport, and what does a charter 91 mean, or a 135, or there was a learning curve into this one that I really needed a lot of different help on once we started branching out into it. So then with Pete and I never wasn't involved in a secondary. I didn't even know what a secondary was, but that's when you have a warrantless search for somebody that's coming across the border, or leaving the border. So we had learned that when he would fly, he would stop in Puerto Rico to refuel, and then that would be his border exit, Puerto Rico, then to go to Guyana. And so we ended up performing a secondary search on him. And when that was done, I was working with Pete Chartier at Homeland Security, and he was helping me coordinate with Homeland Security down in Puerto Rico and CBP, Custom Border Patrol. And I worked with another agent, Tarika Davis, and there's another agent down there, Abel Nasser, who's like a plane guru, knows everything about planes and mechanics. And let me take a step back. I actually reached out to FAA to kind of figure out, okay, what do I need to learn about this thing? And I came across an agent, Steve Tockerman, and he was aces. Steve was an investigator within the FAA, and I cold called him, kind of what I would have done with Tuckman Sports Enterprises
back in your sports marketing days. Hi, you don't know me, but I've got an offer you can't refuse.
And so now I'm picking his brain, and he's telling what I need to do, and getting blue ribbon copies. Like, what the hell's a blue ribbon copy? It's the official copy of a plane record or a plane transfer, and that's something you would need if you were going to seize a plane. And so we started then as this team going through, and now starting to track the flights of this person. And there's another agency that I didn't know about that's called AMOC, Air Marine Operations Center, and they track the movement of planes and marine operations. And so now I'm working with different investigators out in Air Marine Operations. There's a guy, John Schulman, who was out there, who was aces. And again, now I'm we're building this case into now following him, and ultimately it leads to, I was actually volunteer football coaching, and it was the championship game for this team. And I'm on the sidelines, but yet I'm on the phone with the team now in San Juan that is telling me, we just found $620,000 stuffed in this plane that's heading now south to Guyana. And so it's like, okay, this adds a whole nother wrinkle, because all we saw was money being deposited, and now we see money being bulk cash smuggled. And so,
hey, and real quickly too, for folks that are wondering, Guyana is right next to Venezuela. So, it's not, some people might think, oh, it's way out there, but really it's a short hop from Florida to Puerto Rico to Guyana. And tell everybody, when you say secondary, why is it that the United States, San Juan, or Puerto Rico is a U.S. territory? You don't have to have a warrant when you're at the border, when you're folks like CBP and Homeland Security, because its entry or exit from a country, and warrants don't apply,
Correct.
right?
Yeah. So it's. I mean, they still. In my experience with the secondary, there's a reason for the secondary. There's, underlying, look at all this money that's being moved. Look at, what's going on. And
Yeah, it's not like they're just walking down the line going,
yeah,
every third person,
exactly.
we're just going to search you. They're looking for indicators.
Right, exactly. And so, there was CMIRs that were filled out that were bogus, because obviously you got caught with $620,000.
It didn't account for $620,000,
No.
did it?
And it's funny because the other pilot who was with him, his wife trained police dogs, trained canines, and when he saw the dog alert to the bags, he knew something was up. And he's like, what the hell is going on? And sure enough, yeah.
So this other guy had no clue what was going on?
No, as everything was under, in the experience of this investigation, it was like probably a lot of red flags, but nobody wanted to explore the red flags. We learned that
because it would interrupt the gravy train that they were getting paid.
We learned that the business itself had no business. Like there was no, and I talked about this 135. The 135 is the ability to be a taxi in the sky. So there's a lot of rules with FAA that you have to go and show that you are, maintaining the plane and doing all these things correctly, and that you're taking a fee to fly people around. Well, when you go to register the flight, none of his flights were registered as 135s. They were all registered as 91s, which means it's a private flight. So he's flying privately. And when we interviewed the bookkeeper, she said, I don't know how he stayed in business. He didn't have any paid flights in 14. He had maybe 3 in 13. But, anytime they needed money, they would call him up and he would just deposit money into the accounts to cover fuel, maintenance, salaries, whatever. And so then now as once we did the secondary and he got charged with bulk cash smuggling, now we're moving into, okay, let's start doing our interviews and trying to figure out what is this story that's going on. And we're starting to hear from the bookkeeper, former business partners. He had told everybody that he made money selling a trucking company. And when we interviewed the trucking company, there was nothing, he took a loss on the sale or very minimal gain on the sale. So that blew his story right out of the water. And then, we're interviewing other business partners and learning that he's structuring into their accounts too. So we're starting now to paint a financial picture that instead of the 7.5 million that we see in the bank accounts, it actually bumped up to 10.2 in cash that he had moved through various means. One of the bigger pieces is he had political connections in Guyana that allowed him to get state access to the state airport, and he built a hangar, almost $2 million hangar on state property in Guyana. And when we interviewed some of the pilots, they would say, well, there was no reason, there's no business out of Guyana where you're going to fly in and out of Guyana. And we learned that he was trying to build a jet medevac business. And one of the pilots says, well, that's a very easy way to get through customs, because in a medevac business, you're transferring people in emergency. And the thought is maybe you might be able to get through customs easier with an emergency on board. So who knows what that would have left to if he got into that. And then he was buying business properties up in near Stewart International Airport, which was one of his hubs. And it was a secluded business property. It was a garage that you could pull into the bay off the street in the middle of nowhere and pull out of the bay. So if you needed to transport drugs or cash, that was a perfect location to do that. So he was like setting himself up, in my opinion, to do all these different things. And, when the border stop happened, it all came crashing down. And, then.
Well, let's back up from that border stop too, because we also let's talk about how you developed the information about how did you know he was transporting cocaine? So
through the course of the investigation, once we rang the bell and there was a press releases on the pilot that was arrested in San Juan moving $620,000, it was big news in Guyana. there was some headlines, and a parallel investing came out of it in Rochester, New York. And there was a case in Rochester that, I worked with a bunch of different people up there. Jimmy Schmitz, which I think
The actor?
No. But so
I'm gonna say this sounds like Law and Order. Were you in a Law and Order episode up there?
So they were running like a whole nother street level case and working up the mountain towards their source of supply. And after the border stop, information came out that the supply was the pilot, and he ultimately got indicted for cocaine charges out of the Western District of New York. And then that kind of, we had the money side of it, they had the drug side of it. And, we had two different cooperators that actually testified at trial to talk about his involvement in drugs. And through the course of this Rochester investigation, they had a search warrant that uncovered 17 kilos of cocaine, cash and multiple arrests and firearms and all this other stuff. And so then from that, it kind of morphed. Now I had the DEA on board. So let me back up a little bit. When we did the border stop and came up with the 620, and we're starting to see, manifests of the plane, and now we're starting to paint pictures of people that might have been traveling with him based on witness interviews, based on manifests, what have you. We now have a drug angle that we now exploit using DEA agents out of New York. So, I worked with an agent, Ken Kameninski, who's I think now out of Philly, and Carolyn Miller, and they started exploring the drug angle on their end. And they have access to a whole nother level of databases, and they started running with it. And that's when they stumble on to the Westchester case. So, Jim Schmitz and Malcolm Van Alstine, they have their own task force up in Rochester, and they climb the ladder. And like I said, it ultimately leads to a source of supply. That's a pilot that was arrested with $620,000. So
until the time you made the arrest, or this with the 620, you had no idea about those other investigations, right?
No. I was strictly, financial, looking at the movement of cash, the structuring of cash. And listen, you could speculate all you wanted. Flights coming out of Guyana, out of South America. I mean, the writing was on the wall that this was drugs. But, until I hooked up with the DEA and really saw, the different pieces that were coming out of that. And then, the cooperators that testified at trial that painted that whole picture of, we had both ends of the timing of the cash. We had a cooperator that talked about how he got involved in first bringing cocaine on private planes. And then we had a cooperator at the end who was involved in the 17 kilos that were found in the search warrant. So, with those two cooperators, they painted a complete picture of how, he got into the movement of, cocaine and where the money came from and how the money was delivered and how it was packaged. And it at trial, it was a 2-week long trial. And they, like I said, they painted this whole picture as to.
Now, the aircraft that he was using, these weren't just twin engines, were they? These are very nice jet planes, right?
Yeah, again, Lear jets. He had actually, in his money laundering scheme, he had purchased his first jet. And, when you're earning cash and you're spending it now on fuel and maintenance and pay off the plane, now you're spending cash to pay off the previous owner of the hangars, and you're depositing cash and moving it away. It all kind of stems now from this cash, and it dirties up everything that he's touching. So he actually had 3 planes, one of which was seized at the border for the border stop. Then another one that was seized, we seized, that was his main plane that was actually being it was being fixed when he was flying the second plane. And then we seized a third plane, which was a plane that we saw him purchase, sourced with the drug cash. But it was a plane that he was going to dump more money into maintaining it and getting it up to, up to speed. And that was, a bigger plane, a Challenger, I think it was.
Hey, players, that is the end of part 1. Part 2, as always, comes out on Thursday. In the meantime, check us out at Game of Crimes on Twitter, at Game of Crimes Podcast on Facebook, at the Instagram. But where you got to be, got to be on patreon.com/Game of Crimes. We have a ton of good stuff, including, if you are at the right level, Guardian of the Realm and Warden of the Throne, we have just released part 1, episode 1 of The Real DEA Narcos, talking about the real DEA Narcos, Cali edition. Chris Feistel and Dave Mitchell go in depth, 16 hours, about how they took down the Cali cartel. Information you will not hear anywhere else in the world, not on Netflix, not anywhere, not in a book, only right here on Game of Crimes at patreon.com/Game of Crimes. In the meantime, also go check out our webpage, gameofcrimespodcast.com. We've got the latest merch, pictures for every episode that we put up, books that our guests write. We only put up books that they write. We put them up there. So we thank you once again for being a player in the biggest, baddest, most dangerous game of all, the Game of Crimes.